Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and a few people started asking me this question again, and I'm kind of like, I've answered this multiple times in videos, but then I realized I've gained like 10 or 12,000 subscribers since I've actually addressed this really common question inside the industry. So I'm like, well, maybe I should answer it again and break it down for you guys. How much protein do you really need? Well, if you're looking for a flat answer like the fitness industry tries to give you, this fixed number based upon how much you weigh, these simplistic models like 1 gram per pound of body weight, I'm not going to endorse that. That actually doesn't seem to be the case. What I'm going to stick to is basically just what scientific literature says, who have studied athletes, looking at college level athletes, high school level athletes, professional athletes, various people to see what their needs are in order to maximize performance, maximize muscle gain, maximize body recomposition to the best of their knowledge. And honestly, the protein is much lower than the industry would have you believe. And I'm all for protein shakes, guys. Don't get me wrong. I drink protein shakes sometimes, but when they're being used to push protein numbers that aren't really necessary, it's time to step in and give some realistic numbers. Now, I'm going to give you guys a couple different sets of numbers here for a reason, because people's goals and what they're eating actually varies a lot. For people who are in a calorie surplus, they are trying to gain muscle. And they're overeating and slowly gaining weight. If you're gaining any weight at all, you're in a calorie surplus. So for people in that situation, they're going to want to consume somewhere between 1 gram and 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So those of you who don't know how kilos to pounds work, because about half of my audience is American, you divide your pounds by 2.2 and that gives you your kilos. So let's use a really simplistic model. Let's say it's a 220 pound guy like me. That means that I weigh 100 kilos. Nice even number here. 1 to 1.6 grams times 100 kilos is between 100 and 160 grams of protein for someone my size to gain muscle. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, that can't be enough. But you guys would be really surprised how much is even given to people like NFL players, top level strength athletes by some of the best coaches in the world. And it's not to say you can't consume more protein than that. And in fact, there aren't some other fringe benefits to consumption of more protein, such as appetite regulation, the slowing down of digestion, things like that. But as far as actual additional muscle gains, there does not appear to be any measurable amount of muscle gains different by going beyond that. And it's people just don't understand that it has to do with how little protein you actually need to gain the muscle you're going to gain. And even if you try to plug it in for a numbers thing and say, well, there's 120 grams of protein in a pound of muscle, and if you're 100% efficient, you'll need to eat an extra 100 grams of protein to gain a pound of muscle. Who gains a pound of muscle in any reasonable time frame without drugs or complete noob gains? So, and even people making noob gains, if you look at it from that perspective, for them to gain 2 pounds of muscle in a month, which is, again, only the most extreme possible scenarios does that happen, that's only about 240 grams of additional protein consumed in an entire month. So if you do the math, if you add 10 grams of protein a day, that's 300 grams of protein. So if you account for the losses going on, so 60 grams lost through digestion, other things, a 10 gram increase in protein is enough to facilitate 2 extra pounds of tissue in a month. So 10 grams will do it. So it's been overhyped. And again, for those who don't believe that, if you guys go look at those studies that I produced for you guys of the guys who gained 18 pounds of muscle in 20 weeks using anabolic steroids don't create protein out of nothing. Your body doesn't create protein without the amino acids and protein already in your diet. It can't make this on its own, unfortunately for us. It would be nice if it could, but it can't. If you look at those studies, you will note that they were on 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. That was enough protein for the drugs themselves to put 18 pounds of muscle on these guys in a 20-week period of time. So for them to get gains that exceeded even lifting weights for noob gains. So when you really look at it objectively for both drug-free and guys on drugs, the amount of protein that people are recommended is higher than it needs to be. And I'm not saying there can't be additional benefits, but it certainly isn't adding additional muscle to you. And that's something that people need to understand there. All right, so what about for fat loss? Well, fat loss is actually a completely different story. This is one reason percentages for protein intake absolutely do not work. Because if people say, well, I consume 25 or 30% or 40% or whatever it happens to be of my calories from protein, they're actually eating a lot more protein on a bulk than on a cut. And as calories come down, their protein would come down. So this is one reason these percentage ideas don't work, because when you go on a calorie deficit and you are losing weight, we have found that you need more protein to hold on to the muscle tissue that you've already gained than you need to consume in order to gain the muscle. So that 1 to 1.6 actually isn't always enough to maintain your muscle mass when cutting. And the actual amount that you need fluctuates massively for retaining your muscle. It's going to depend on how lean you already are, and it's going to depend upon how fast you are losing the weight and how large your calorie deficit is. Because someone who has less fat, their body has less reserves to tap into. It's going to be more likely to break down tissue protein for fuel. So if you're leaner and you're cutting and losing fat, you actually need more protein than you did when you were slightly fatter. And the same for the speed at which you're losing it. Someone who's losing half a pound a week does not need to consume as much protein as someone losing a full pound or even a pound and a half a week, because the calorie deficit is smaller, and again, it's less likely to tap into tissue proteins for fuel. So you need that additional protein for muscle sparing, and it's going to range anywhere from about 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. Now, interestingly enough, for our same 100 kilo person, that means 150 to 200 grams. We're still slightly under the 1 gram per pound of body weight, because that would have been 220 if we go by the traditional magazine and fitness industry recommendations. Now, I want to add an additional caveat here, because that doesn't mean that there aren't benefits to going higher protein. What I would say to people is that there are other factors going on with protein in your diet. One of the biggest ones, satiety. The higher protein diet you have, the less you tend to eat. And it's due to a number of reasons. There are hormonal reasons involved, as far as lesser hormone responses to the protein intake that do cause less spikes in appetite. There's the fact that it takes longer to digest and absorb protein than it does carbohydrates. So replacing some of your dietary carbohydrates, if you have an appetite problem, is going to suppress your appetite more, simply because it takes longer to break it down, and it has a more full feeling in your stomach. And this is backed by quite a bit of data over the years that we've looked at. So it actually fills you up better, and you're less likely to overeat. Now, the downfall is that for some people, replacing too much of their dietary carbohydrates with protein will reduce training performance. Reduced training performance means less calories burned, less muscle retained, because you're not stimulating them as much in the gym or with your training. So finding that right balance is kind of ideal. And that goes out the window for guys who are on drugs. And part of the reason for that is it doesn't matter. They're going to keep their muscle no matter what. So if they just load up on really heavy protein, and this is the strategy that you see among guys who are on drugs or using anabolics, is that they tend to sometimes go 300, 400, 500 grams of protein a day when cutting. And it's because they're not worried about losing muscle through training performance. The drugs themselves, as long as they're training decently hard, even if their performance goes down, the drugs themselves will preserve muscle. And in some cases, even while they're losing weight, if the anabolic signal from the drug is high enough, they'll gain a little muscle. So they need that additional protein, because they are burning protein for fuel because they're in a deficit. Unlike people in a surplus, they might be able to utilize that to build a little bit of muscle tissue. So that's a different animal. But for drug-free guys, it is more difficult to strike that balance, and it's something that you need to consider. But the other point to consider there is that if it suppresses your appetite enough, it doesn't matter, because if you perform a little less and you lose a little bit of additional muscle while you're cutting, just due to the performance dropping, as soon as you go back to eating normal again and your training picks back up, your strength returns, you're going to regain the muscle very quickly through muscle memory. You're going to regain it twice as fast as you gained it the first time. So it isn't always a concern. But the thing is, it's about finding what's right for you with that balance when cutting. Just remember, though, that you need a lot more protein when cutting and losing fat than you do to gain muscle when actually gaining weight. It can be as much as twice as much required in comparison to your body weight when you're trying to retain muscle tissue when you're cutting. And there is the appetite suppressing component. But the amount that you need to gain muscle itself has been really highly overrated by the industry. The other caveat I will add for people who are trying to do a recomposition and stay at the same weight, due to the factors that I listed, it might be beneficial to actually run your protein as high as the people who are trying to lose fat. So that 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight is probably a much better idea for someone who is trying to recomposition and neither bulk nor cut. So just another little caveat to consider there. All right, guys, so I really hope this has been informative and it kind of breaks down for you what you need in terms of protein for your goals, whether you're completely natural, drug-free, lifetime drug-free, whether you're enhanced. This kind of gives you guys a good idea of what's going on. So I will talk to you guys next time.